What's up, guys? Adam here with Anabolic Climbing, and now the long-awaited blood work results of the Anavar experiment. Before we begin, I am not a doctor, I am not a medical professional, I am a rock climber that enjoys doing drugs recreationally, apparently. And now we're going to find out if the experiment was in vain, if I damaged my health, what were the outcomes on the scale, what were the outcomes on the strength tests. I'll tell you what I did, how I measured it, and yeah, without further ado, sorry for the delay, let's get into it. So I have about 4.5 years worth of blood work on the screen right now. And you guys can see everything from what I was eating, I have some references based off of what I was eating, if there were any PEDs deployed, what was being done, things like that. So, quick little bit, and by the way, as I interpret this, if you guys have anything in the comments, if you are a medical professional to help me read this, I think that's great. The way this is set up is all of the reference ranges are right here. The timeline of what's happening of the lab work is here. A brief note about the diet and protocol, what was being measured, and green is in range, yellow is high, and red, as we're going to see later, is out of reference range. If anyone wants to provide any more context, I think that would be awesome. I'm not a doctor. I'm reading this to the best of my ability. So, for some baseline, basically between 2021 and 2023, I was still climbing 3 to 4 times a week. I was eating whatever I wanted, which, probably consisted of more chicken nuggets, eggs, things of that nature. I kept carbs relatively clean. I don't think I went super crazy on the sweets around these times, but, sometimes when you get high, you really like eating sweets. Stopped smoking weed at the end of 2023. And then everything started to get a lot cleaner. In 2024, I tried doing a carnivore diet. We're going to see how that played out a little bit later. Toward the end of 2024, in July, started out on the 200 IUs of HCG. I was also taking L-carnitine during this period in July of 2024. And the last labs that we did in February are my labs based off of 10 weeks of 5 milligrams of Anavar, 330 IUs of HCG, and about 3 weeks of SLU PP332. So, without further ado, to the best of my knowledge, let's get into it. Thyroid, in all cases, looked pretty good. Blood count in everything seems to be okay. I don't really know what BUN is, but for my metabolic panel, everything looks pretty good across the board. Not too much to see here. Again, if you're a medical professional and you could tell me and help me interpret some of these ranges, I think this would be good. So now things start getting interesting. Looking at the liver markers have actually improved from what I can interpret, and everything has been in range this entire time. I was running Tudka this entire time, as well as citrus bergamot, as well as omega-3 fish oils. About 3 grams a day. I just bumped it up to 4. But as we know, oxandrolone is hepatotoxic and liver toxic, and look at that. We are looking pretty darn clean. Honestly, no major discernible difference between when I was on versus when I was off. Cholesterol is when things start to get a little bit interesting, and this was really cool for me as well. As much of a colossal pain as this was putting all of this together in the spreadsheet, it took a couple hours. This is really a story that's been really good for me to see, and hopefully for you guys as well. So my cholesterol in general has actually gotten lower over the course of this experiment, which is awesome. Triglycerides have gotten lower. I'm not sure if I know there is a cap to where going too low is bad, but so far we're still in range. This data set from 2021, I remembered speaking to my patient coordinator, and he was like, "What are you doing? This is like the best labs I've seen in months." And, you know, the answer was getting high and eating chicken nuggets. I might have some pretty good genetics for tolerating that stuff. But, you know, I had really good HDL, like in reference range LDL. And that's the only time I've had in reference range LDL. I don't know if, I'm not going to suggest smoking weed for improving your cholesterol. That's an unhinged take. But that was the best labs I've ever had. And since then, my HDL has continually gone down into the range. When it's above 60, it's protective, is what has been explained to me. And my LDL started to creep up, really peaking around my carnivore experiment. And I was talking to the doctor at that point, and he was like, "Hey, this is a little too high for you. If you are frying things in fat," which I was taking the beef tallow, cooking it up, and then cooking the steak in the beef tallow, you know, the HDL went up, but my LDL was the highest it's ever been outside of the range. So I've been actively trying to curb that. So oxandrolone will actually make your LDL worse along with your HDL. And interestingly enough, my HDL continues to go down. It's still within the reference range, still smack dab in the middle of it. But it didn't go down as much as I would have thought after cutting out the red meat. And, like, I still have red meat occasionally. It's just not a mainstay in my diet. And, you know, introducing the oxandrolone. So here's my last labs with HCG only and carnitine. Lowered my LDL, which is great. And then continued to lower it. We're getting closer and closer back into range. I'm hoping to get it down further on my next round of labs. But HDL dropped as well. I'm going to be doing some organ imaging on both my heart as well as my liver and kidneys, probably in April. I'll report back on that. And the reason is because I've had my LDL elevated for a while. Just want to make sure I don't have any plaque buildup in the heart. That's super avoidable. You know, worst case scenario, get on a statin or something. But so far, I have made some decent improvements to LDL, which is cool. And HDL is still in range. I measured my iron. I was cooking in a cast iron pan. All my iron readings were super high, so everything's been in range since. Testosterone. Let's talk about it. Back when I was younger, smoking weed, doing whatever I wanted, had, frankly, flawless test, which was super cool. And as I have gotten older and sobered up, my test has, frankly, gone down dramatically to a point where I noticed the exhaustion. I thought HCG would have had a more positive impact on it. To be honest, part of that, I think, was being sick. I was super, super sick. I don't know if it was COVID or what it was when I had this tested back in October, but I was pretty run down. And yeah, while I was also kicking a cold here as well, which I do think contributes, I was also just getting back from Japan. I was pretty jet lagged. You know, you could still see a pretty precipitous decline over the course of the last 4 years. One thing that I noticed personally is I tend to have elevated prolactin. You could see that in a couple of these tests. Since then, I've been taking, I think it's B6, P5P, to try to keep that back in range. I started having gyno since puberty, so it's just something that if it starts to flare up, I am acutely aware of it. I thought that it was actually going to be an issue for me on the estrogen side, but it seems to be more prolactin driven. When I actually look at my estrogen a little bit lower, it's wild. There were times where I was actually below the reference range. So funny enough, now that I am taking the HCG, it actually brought my estradiol back in range. That could explain why I've been feeling a little bit better. Frankly, just good to have it back in range. I didn't realize how much it was getting crushed over the last couple of years from whatever it was that was going on with me. And the last thing that frankly terrified me at first and I needed some explanation was the C-reactive protein. So initially at 4, that's out of the reference range. 2.59, that's doing fine. I didn't have any from when I was super sick. I would have loved to have seen that. And while I had a cold with this, I am way out of the reference range. The cap is about 3. My worst prior to this was 4, and I'm hanging out here at 14. Given the fact that all of my other markers are fine, I think it has largely to do with the cold that I had and the jet lag. We're going to do some organ imaging to double check that stuff. But you have a trained individual who is probably dealing with some systemic inflammation from both training and jet lag and cold. And when I spoke to my patient coordinator about it, he said, look, man, that's probably what that is. Given the fact that my liver markers are otherwise fine, I'm probably in good shape. So there you have it. 4.5 years of data, most of which is looking pretty darn clean. And yeah, we're going to try to take some pregnenolone to lower the macroprolactin. We are going to go over some of the lessons that we learned before we talk about some of the other drugs that may or may not be deployed on this next cycle. But here are my key takeaways. Number 1, low dose of Anavar, which is a high dose for a woman. Don't take Anavar in excess of 5 milligrams. If you're a woman, don't take Anavar. I know that it can be tolerated in small doses. Don't do that. Virilization is not a thing you probably want. But, it's super tolerable for men. This is something that I've seen folks run year-round. Right now, blood work is looking pretty darn flawless, all things considered. If I can continue to bring down my LDL, I'm going to call this a total win, personally. And yeah, I do think that I will up my oxandrolone from 5 milligrams to 10, and maybe I'll try 20 on training days occasionally after we ramp that up. But right now, I am more interested in incorporating some testosterone since my numbers have been dropping like a rock. Over this time, I also deployed SLUPP332 for about 3 weeks, and I want to talk about why and what my experience was on that. I'm going to make a longer video about this later, but I was in Japan for 2.5 weeks, eating like a monster. Every day I was in Japan, I had at least 2 croissants a day. I miss them so much. I had ice cream almost every day, sometimes twice a day. Hokkaido soft serve goes super hard. I was eating anything and everything that I want. And when I started deploying the oxandrolone, I was probably in the 15-16% body fat range. And when I got back from Japan, I weighed about 158 pounds. And at this point, I had been on Anavar for probably about 8 weeks. And I was leaner at 158 than I was at 155, which is awesome. That is kind of what you'd expect from performance-enhancing drugs. And, being able to eat like an absolute mongrel and not gain weight. And, I was also doing between 9 to 20,000 steps a day. But still, I did not feel a ton of side effects from the SLUPP332, which we're just going to call Sloopy. I did not feel too many effects. I was a little bit hotter, nothing crazy. I've heard reports of folks being like nonstop sweating, and I guess if you're in Thailand and not in a winter climate, that's a thing that could be. But yeah, this was super low impact. I didn't mind it. Way lighter weight than Yohimbine or something like that. I thought it was pretty chill. And the fact that it didn't impact my blood works, I think might be responsible for helping me on the diabetes stuff, which I want to say is my either my glucose levels or my AST. I'll double check that later. Definitely lightweight, something I'm going to explore later, but I still want more laboratory data to come back on that. Right now I just see bodybuilders, biohackers, and lab rats with good blood work, and while I didn't gain weight, that doesn't mean you should take it. Longer review on that will come later. So now let's get to the interesting stuff. What were my starting benchmarks for 20 millimeter edge and weighted pull-ups, and where did we end up? 20 millimeter edge, I couldn't hang on it when we started this experiment. I was able to get about 2 seconds at most, and the Abrahangs, the daily hangs, were awesome. I think for Anavar, it might be the best go-to way to improve finger strength. I went from being able to hold on the 2 millimeter edge for 2 seconds to 7 seconds with 30 pounds attached, which is insane. I was blown away by the growth and strength. Abrahangs are awesome. I think they're the safest way to train on Anavar for finger strength. And for weighted pull-ups, with perfect form, I started at about 25 pounds for 5 reps, finished at about 50. With bad form, I was able to get up to about 70 pounds for 5 reps. I was able to do 90 for a 1 rep max. So pretty substantial increases in strength for about 8 of 10 weeks training, with 2 weeks just kind of screwing around in Japan. I did climb there, but it was only once a week. It wasn't a ton of training. Although I did do Abrahangs every day in Japan. Shout out to that. Let's talk about the scale. Started at 155, finished at 158, leaner than I was at 155. So definitely put on some contractile tissue. Do I think I lost, or do I think I burned fat in that period? Maybe. It's kind of hard to tell because I have been in a caloric deficit for most of it, trying to keep sub 2,200 calories a day, and I'm still growing. Part of that is muscle memory. Part of that is weight training. I haven't really done a ton of weight training for the past 6 years, and getting into weight training again, I've put on some size relatively quickly. But yeah, strength has been going up pretty consistently, and I am loving that. What else? What are some other notes that I have here? Could I have gone higher on the dose? Obviously. This is an intentional choice for a couple of reasons. While tolerated doses in the medical deployment for burn victims is like 25 milligrams per day for men, and while I think that could be a really cool PED choice, I wanted to make sure I was able to try this out and not get injured. For the first 2 to 3 weeks, I felt like I was going to pull through my fingers. It was a very noticeable acute increase in strength. And now that a tolerance has been built and I'm able to, I've adjusted to the strength, as I go up in it, I want to continue to see if that's a dose-dependent response, or if once you build up a tolerance, the strength increases kind of level out. Also, that kind of goes with the goal. I'm trying to be able to take low-dose Anavar for a long time, not necessarily for an acute duration. So far, goals have been pretty good. I think it's a great compound for boulderers, to be honest. I am not sold on it for sport climbers, particularly at higher doses, since the pump is a thing. Not so much at lower doses, but, I was sort of rehabbing a bit, getting back from like V4 to V6, and was able to do that pretty darn quickly. Feel way more comfortable and stable on the wall. As I sort of cut out the Abrahangs for the last 2 weeks, my bicep tendons have felt better. I think part of that is just giving them more rest. Since taking some more rest, bicep tendons feel good, fingers feel amazing, back strength is super, super high. So yeah, no real injury to speak of. It's been a really good strength cycle, all things considered. Probably the best one I have had in my 6-year climbing career. One thing I do notice on the oxandrolone is it takes me longer to recover between burns. Usually, before I got on this, I could kind of just try a hard problem, give it a minute, get ready to go right back. Now it takes me another couple minutes to gather my strength in between. If I worked on more cardio, I think that could be a positive outcome. I think that's a thing that's manageable. Do I think I could have taken 5 milligrams of Anavar without ancillaries like Tudka, citrus bergamot, things of that nature? I might have been able to get away with it. My blood work looks pretty good, but I also want to be as safe as possible. So even if these supplements aren't improving my health markers, it's peace of mind, and I'm going to continue to publish my lab work. So you guys can see along with me what the trends are in my health as doses change. I could have dieted harder and probably kept it to 155. At 159, though, I still feel pretty good, pretty strong. What else? So now there's sort of two other takeaways that I want to mention upon closing. And this is sort of what's going to kick off the next chapter in both my training and my PED use. Number one, I want to deploy testosterone first before Anavar. I think that's where I'm going to get the most benefit to well-being, not necessarily to overall performance. I think that going and raising my test from, the 450s to over 1,000 NDL will probably have some pretty good recovery effects for me. Will I hold on to more tissue? I kind of expect to. Cards on the table. I started tests. I'm about 1 week in. We're doing about 150 milligrams a week. I'm going to go up to 175. I might go up to 200, but the dosing is really clean at 175 for me. Just 25 milligrams a day seems pretty easy. And, within the first couple days, I'm not going to say that I'm pulling harder or feel stronger, but the level of fatigue that you sort of carry goes down. Being tired does not feel as bad. It's sort of been described as like a sense of resilience, and I totally feel that. Doing hard shit doesn't feel as bad. I'm a pretty big fan. And, could I just start blasting and going super physiological almost immediately? Obviously. But, I have to, if I go up too high, my estrogen is going to start to creep up. Do I want to deploy an aromatase inhibitor without blood work for another 2 months? Probably not. Let's keep things in range, see how I feel, and after a month, I might bump up the Anavar from 5 milligrams to 10. I don't think I'm going to continue to take SLU PP 332 while I'm in the strength cycle. Definitely for a vacation to keep weight off, but I kind of want to get a little bit bigger. I have been doing more deadlifts, I have been doing more weighted pull-ups, and I want to focus on power for the next training block that I do, both in terms of deadlifts, weighted pull-ups, and muscle-ups. And if I'm going to gain another 5-10 pounds, super good with that. Going up to 170 might be the target, and then afterwards I'll see how I feel from there. One thing to note about that, as I'm training fingers in particular on the hangboard, now that I'm starting to do weighted hangs, stepping on the scale is really helpful. When I get to the gym, 2 to 3 pounds is a lot to carry, and if I'm heavier that day on the test, it's definitely a thing to be mindful of when hangboarding. Preventing injury is key. And last thing, I'm still very new to this, but the real thing I've learned in all of this is that drugs are super fucking strong. I've been on a girl's dose of Anavar for the past 3 months, gained weight, gained a ton of strength, felt way more comfortable on the wall, and that's practically nothing. Could I go up to 0.5 gram of drugs? Yes. Do I think that the performance benefit would be any higher than being at like 300 to 350 milligrams? I'm not sold on that right now. My total drug burden when I go to 175 milligrams of testosterone is going to be about 0.2 grams, and it's still, like, I know we're in TRT territory, but the changes in physique are pretty noticeable, and the changes in strength are too. I could go up to 350 in a way that's like responsible. I could maybe push it to 500, but I don't. At least right now, I don't see the need for it. I'm also almost 40, so we'll see how that feels. And let's talk about the last goal for the training block and what's sort of the long term trajectory of this. Next year I turn 40. And one of the goals that I have is to send Rainbow Rocket. Simple 1.5 move boulder, but something that speaks to my soul. So all of my training is going to be directed toward that. So that is a lot of raw power, coordination for the dyno, some squats, as well as contact strength. Working with a coach to really refine that. There's a ton of training footage that I'm going to post afterwards, but I wanted to get this video out first. And really all of my training is going to be going toward Rainbow Rocket. Between now and then, because I'm probably going to aim for that in either March or October of next year, there will be plenty of climbing footage, plenty of updates on drugs. But yeah, for the time being, we're going to introduce tests for the next month, come back with lab work, introduce more Anavar, come back with lab work. Will I introduce Primobolan or Masteron? It's possible, especially if the test creeps up. It makes sense to use those to control the estradiol. I have so many folks that I'm seeing right now running 25 milligrams of Trenbolone a week, and I am not committed to that life yet. But as crazy as Tren is, 25 milligrams a week seems like a potentially tolerable dose. So I am not sure if I'm going to run that, but there is a non-zero chance that that's a thing. In the meanwhile, that's where we're at. I have a whole bunch of other ideas for hand growth protocols that I'm not going to do, but I'll leave to the next generation. I'm going to continue to review other compounds, whether it be Deca or Turinabol or other things that we're going to test later on in the year. So stick around. In the meanwhile, it's been a super long video so far. I appreciate you so much for sticking around, considering it's been darn near 30 minutes. But yeah, thank you for hanging out with me on this journey so far. Looking forward to more hard sends, more weight training, and more reviews on anabolics. This is Adam with Anabolic Climbing. Appreciate you guys, and I will see you guys soon. Take care.